You're watching YouTube, the cable access of the 21st century. It's Thursday, it's 4 p.m. where I am, and it's time to talk about movies and answer your questions. Welcome to Dan's World. Hello, everybody, and welcome to another edition of Dan's World. We're back live this week on Thursday. I was off last week because I was in Los Angeles, and I'm going to tell you a little bit more about that trip. I had so much fun, and I'm a day late for another reason, which we're also going to talk about, and we have a bunch of news to talk about. The film festival season is in full swing, and we're getting our first look at a lot of the Oscar contenders, a lot of the movies, a lot of the performances, including Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson at the Academy Awards as a nominee. According to the early buzz on the Smashing Machine, it seems like that is a distinct possibility. We also got the announcement of a new Superman movie. And of course, I'm going to be talking about your questions and what you want to talk about here on the show. So if you have something that you want to ask, I will definitely see it. If you want to leave a super chat, I'll read every one of those questions that comes in during the show. I don't really know how many people are going to be watching today because it has been kind of a crazy few weeks. Like I said, I'm going to fill you in on that and why it may be kind of an interesting few more weeks going ahead. All good reasons. But I want to talk a little bit about what I was doing last week. Let me check in on the comments as well, just to make sure you can see me, you can hear me. It looks like you can. So yeah, I was in Los Angeles last week. This was a trip that I had planned from really right around New Year's. I went to see a bunch of friends, and I was staying with a couple of my good friends. If you watch the Schmodown, the movie trivia Schmodown, then you would probably recognize these names. My good friends Sam Levine and his wife, Rachel Cushing Levine. They were my generous hosts when I went back to California back in January, and something popped up on TV. It was a Weird Al Yankovic video. And I was talking to Sam about how much I love Weird Al. He loves Weird Al. Rachel loves Weird Al. And Sam said, well, you know, he's going on tour this year, and I think we should go. We should go see Weird Al. And so last week I went to see Weird Al Yankovic in San Diego. Let me tell you, this was one of the performances. I took this picture. There's so many great pictures. I took some videos, but I try not to take too many during a show because I want to be present. But it was an incredible performance. He did all the costume changes and everything. He did full songs. He did medleys. For a Weird Al fan like myself, as long as I have been, it was a lot of fun. And because Sam knows everybody in Hollywood, I got to scratch two things off my bucket list. Because after the show, I got to briefly say hi and meet Weird Al, which was just like the most amazing experience in the world. They say don't meet your heroes. That does not apply to Weird Al because he was so nice. I mean, he'd just done like a 2-hour show, but he was just the kindest person. He's everything that he seems like he is. Ironically, as I was waiting to be able to say hello, I was saying to myself, don't be weird, don't be weird, don't. So I was like, pick one thing to tell him out of your lifetime of being a fan, don't, he just immediately puts you at ease. It was so much fun, and I have to thank Sam and Rachel for suggesting that and helping to make that happen. And it was also just a great time with them. And I decided to extend my stay a bit, go to Los Angeles, see some friends, have dinner with friends, a lot of people that I hadn't seen in a while. If you follow me on Instagram, you might have seen this picture because not only did I have a planned meeting with a bunch of friends, I also was walking around Burbank after meeting up and having lunch with, I don't know if you watch The Real Rejects, Greg Alba, who I haven't really had a chance to talk to in person in a while. We met up, and then he was going back to the garage, and he was like, wait a minute, hang on. Isn't that Roth Cornett? And sure enough, it was. She was going to see a movie at the theater there. And so we got a chance to catch up for about 10 minutes. Luckily, because the AMC pre-show is like 30 minutes long, I didn't make her late for her movie. But I hadn't seen Roth since 2020, literally since the office shut down for COVID and I started the channel. We'd exchanged emails back and forth. We talked on the phone while I was still at Screen Junkies, but it was so great to see Roth, to catch up with Roth and see how she's doing. And I know a lot of people on Instagram were like, do a show with her. We're going to keep in touch. I don't know if she's interested in doing it, not regularly, but, maybe popping in on the channel if she's interested. We kind of reconnected. So it was a great weekend away, kind of a break, at the end of the summer movie season, it's a bit of a crush, and especially as there's a gap, kind of like a 2 to 3 week gap between the end of the summer movie season and really the beginning of award season, which is a big part of what we're going to talk about today. So it was a good time to take a break, but you may see a bit of sporadic scheduling here on the channel because I was originally going to do this show yesterday as scheduled, but I have kind of a full plate right now because literally the day before I traveled out to California, I finished the paperwork on buying a house here where I currently live. Not because I needed to, but just because I kind of had an ear to the ground and I found a place that I thought was really cool and it perfectly suited my needs. And so that is also ongoing. I literally was there earlier today. I came over here to do the show. I'm going to go back over there because I'm getting it ready to move in. But that's exciting. So you're going to see a little bit of a transition period, especially toward the end of the month, because obviously this is all going to move and I'm working on what the new setup's going to be. I think it's going to be pretty similar. But if, this show is maybe a day late, or I have to change the date on a charts, or maybe there's something that I plan to do that I didn't do, that's why. It's because I'm sort of planning that and that transition and also keeping the show on track. But these are all good things. I don't like instability when it's for bad reasons. This is instability for good reasons. And, the good news is once all that is settled in and I'm settled in, that's going to be my home. That's going to be the show's home. And I have some fun stuff planned for the channel. I want to keep doing what I'm doing. This feels good. It feels good for me right now. I know I don't usually open the show with like a personal update or what's going on right now with me outside of the channel, but this is all a good thing. It's been a good time for me. But I did want to make sure that I still did a live show this week because I took last week off, and honestly because I really like doing this. I like doing sort of a looser format. I like answering your questions and seeing what you want to talk about, and I'm going to check in on those in a few minutes. But let's talk about a couple things first. Number one, the kind of big news yesterday, probably something I might have done a whole video on if I wasn't running around like crazy trying to get everything done that I needed to get done. James Gunn announced that there will be a sequel to this summer's Superman, and we don't have to wait that long. It's less than 2 years away. In theaters, July 9th, 2027. It's called Man of Tomorrow. I believe David Cornsweet, and Nicholas Hoult all tweeted a similar picture of Lex Luthor in that sort of power suit, the war suit. So it looks like this is going to be a very Lex-heavy sequel. Will they be fighting each other? Will they be uniting against a common enemy? We don't really know yet, but it is really, I think part of it is, when I talked about Superman, and I still think this is the case, I think the greatest advantage that the DCU has and the greatest disadvantage that it has is that the person in charge, James Gunn, along with Peter Safran, is not only the person that's handling the slate, but also is creatively in charge of so much of it. I think this works to the advantage of the DCU because if James Gunn is doing the Superman sequel, and if he's presumably going to be writing or co-writing the Superman sequel, and he's also the person in charge of setting the schedule, well, then he largely gets to decide when we get another Superman movie, and people were already asking about it. The fact that there is a second movie in theaters 2 years after the first movie is, I think, a good sign for audience interest because there's not going to be this long gap, sort of what we're seeing with the Batman, where we have, a 5-year gap between movies. It's just going to be a 2-year gap. Any of that excitement from Superman, any residual excitement from summer 2026 with Supergirl that may or may not exist will still be there. And, the DC film slate is sort of starting to take shape. Right now we have 4 movies with confirmed release dates, as in they've said the movies will hit theaters on this day. Supergirl next June 26th. Clayface is on the schedule for next September. Then we have Man of Tomorrow hitting theaters on July 9th, 2027, and The Batman Part 2 currently scheduled for October 1st, 2027. The interesting thing that I noticed, unless I overlooked something, but I tried to check as thoroughly as I could, I believe that 2027 will be the first year with both a solo Batman movie and a solo Superman movie. We had Batman v Superman, of course, where they were in the same movie together, but I believe this is the first time in the DC schedule that Batman and Superman will be in their own movie in the same year, unless I'm overlooking something. And if I am, trust me, I know that you will let me know. So really, to have a Batman movie and a Superman movie in theaters the same year, a few months apart, potentially that could be a big year for DC, a big year for Warner Brothers. And then with Supergirl and Clayface, if one or both of those movies hit, then we could see some real momentum starting to build fairly early in this new era for DC. I know that the Batman Part 2 right now isn't part of the DCU proper, but it is still a DC property. So James Gunn obviously really wanting to come out of the gate strong and let people know what to expect. I personally think it's a mistake to do what he and what Marvel have done, especially in these more unstable times where you do this big thing of like, here's all of our movies and we're going to plan out 5 years in the future, because it seems like you miss more of those dates or more of those movies or projects are canceled than you get actually out and on the schedule. I like this kind of more short-term strategy of like, okay, you know what? We're going to let you know a year or two in advance what we're doing with firmer plans, instead of going out 5 to 7 years when people are maybe expecting something and then you realize that's perhaps not the best idea. This is the strategy I prefer. And I think it works more long term if you're looking at audience excitement and expectation. And also, if you put a project on the schedule and it doesn't happen, but it still ends up coming out, a lot of people take that as a sign that it's in trouble or creatively something wasn't working. I think this is the better way to do it. I was surprised that we were going to be getting a Superman sequel so quickly. I think that James Gunn probably had something planned already in his head that he wasn't telling people. And again, I think not telling people your plans can be a good thing as far as the long-term strategy goes. So for people wanting more of this new Superman, we're getting more of them in less than 2 years. So mark your calendars, because that's what's going on. So we're going to talk about Dwayne Johnson and the potential Oscar nominations and the festival season, which is really kicking off. The Venice Film Festival is wrapping up here in the next couple days. The Toronto International Film Festival, which is another one of the big film festivals every year, a lot of Oscar contenders will premiere there, starts today. So we are really getting into the beginning of Oscar buzz and all of these anticipated awards movies and people finally being able to see them and review them, etc. So we're going to talk about all that, but I did want to talk about your questions and what you want to talk about. So let's see what we've got. We got a few questions coming in already. The first one is from Yanir Shaked, who says, hi, any thoughts on why they put Chloe Zhao as the director of the new Buffy? Was it her, quote, ability to copy Joss W's Avengers success and Eternals lead to the assumption that she could copy his magnum opus? I don't know. I haven't read a whole lot about Chloe Zhao, and we're going to talk about her because she has a movie that premiered at the Telluride Film Festival last weekend that is also playing at Toronto that looks to potentially be one of this year's Oscar favorites. But I would hope that the reason that she took the job was that she feels passionately about the material. I don't really think that she copied Joss Whedon's success with Eternals, because the movie wasn't particularly successful, and I respect the artistry behind that movie. But I don't think that it was in any way a blueprint for success or somebody saying like, oh yeah, she was able to do what Joss Whedon did with Avengers. My hope would be that she just really found something in that project that she liked. I don't think that it was really any kind of a trying to directly tie to Joss Whedon and try to redo what he does, especially because Joss Whedon's name does not have the same sort of credit or credibility that it did even 5 or 10 years ago. Freakstomp95 says, with Jaws and K-pop Demon Hunters doing well in theaters, do you think the industry should put mid-budget movies straight to streaming? And if it does well, release it to theaters for 2 weeks? Example, Caught Stealing. I think that the industry should put mid-budget movies in theaters. I think they should put them in theaters, commit to marketing the movies properly. It doesn't have to be a $100 million marketing campaign. I think the problem with sort of the tail wagging the dog of putting a movie out on streaming and then if it's successful putting it out in theaters is you will always have the AMC problem, because Adam Aaron, the CEO of AMC, has sort of doubled down on saying, we didn't play K-pop Demon Hunters because, and honestly, I get this. I understand what he means by this, because he's clarified why AMC didn't play K-pop Demon Hunters. He said, we have a hard and fast rule for what a theatrical window is. And if we make an exception for Netflix, then what is to keep Warner Brothers or Universal or Disney from coming to us and saying, okay, well, we want to chop our theatrical window down as well. You made this exception for Netflix, so why won't you make this exception for us? I get it. I understand. I still think that this should be a little bit more wiggle room there because I don't think it's quite the same thing. It's not like they were trying to put K-pop Demon Hunters in theaters before it came out on Netflix. It's a post theatrical window. So I don't think that they need to be as hard and fast on it as they were, but I understand the reasoning behind that decision. K-pop Demon Hunters is one of those things. I don't think it's replicable. And it's what Hollywood always tries to do is there's a phenomenally successful project and Hollywood says, okay, how do we do that again? The answer on how to do K-pop Demon Hunters again is to invest in a project that is really popular and talks to people that are fans of a certain thing like K-pop, but also has crossover potential. The music, obviously, a big part of why K-pop Demon Hunters was such a breakout hit. I don't think you can just say like, oh yeah, just do it again. That's how we get bad copies of other things. So I think that I wish that there was more of a cooperation between streamers and theaters. I wish that Netflix was more flexible. I wish that AMC particularly was more flexible. But I don't necessarily look at what happened with K-pop Demon Hunters and say, okay, we should try to do that model again with other movies that break out because I don't think that they would be as successful. I think that K-pop Demon Hunters is a unicorn as far as its success that you're not going to see all the time. With Jaws succeeding, I think that is just a product of it's the 50th anniversary. It was the right weekend where you didn't have a whole lot of new releases or at least new releases that had the same appeal. I don't think that you could do that with every movie going forward. Really, I think the answer to what your question is, it's not so much just saying, here's a business strategy that we're going to replicate. It is being strategic, which is more difficult. It's more difficult to say we're going to be very strategic about what we do, and that'll be successful than it is to just sort of do a blanket thing and say, this works, let's just do that. I think that Jaws was very strategically and smartly scheduled for when it was, and I'm happy that it did well. I think it's made over $11 million, which is not crazy money, but it's a great amount of money for a movie that's been out for 50 years. And K-pop Demon Hunters is kind of its own thing. So for me, with mid-budget movies, it's much more, I wish that they weren't so much associated with streaming that they either go direct to streaming or an audience says, I'm just going to wait for streaming. I wish that they would work with the model a little bit more on both ends, theatrical and on streaming, so that those movies can succeed in more beneficial ways on both platforms, in theaters and on streaming. So I think it's a little bit more fundamental for me. Mr. Sheep222 says, have you ever had any interaction with Doug Walker, a.k.a. the Nostalgia Critic? He was on Oni Plays, this is probably a really popular streamer or channel that I'm going to mispronounce. Oni Plays or Oney Plays a few days ago and gave you a shout out. That's very nice. Doug came in, we're talking 10 years ago probably. Doug came in to do some stuff with us at Screen Junkies. And I think he also came out and did some stuff with us at a convention. It's very hazy. I'm almost sure that we did some stuff with him at a convention. And he was very nice. I know that there's been stuff with his channel, and that was just like I tried to get into what was going on with that, and it was so complex and intricate and so many different things and people involved. I have no real idea what happened with that, but he was very, very nice every time that I've met him. I want to say I think we did like a Star Wars a movie fight with him live at a convention, maybe one of our first ones. He was really, really cool, really nice, really fun guy to hang out with. I had no idea that he would have kept up with me all these years later and what I was doing on the channel. So that's great to hear. I honestly respect when you talk about longevity, especially when you're doing something sort of, I'm not as much of a character as Doug is, but I think that he's sort of known for substance, inside of this really broad character. I think that he's also sort of known for substance. So I respect what he's been able to accomplish and maintain over so many years. So that's great. I may have to try to hunt that down. Zach Brown became a YouTube member. Thank you, Zach. I really appreciate that. Welcome. Hope you get to vote in those polls and get early access to some of the videos. Smash says, congratulations, housewarming money. Thank you so much, Smash. I appreciate that. Very much appreciated. Let's see. Andre the Turtle says, Lion King 2019 may be the only animated film that's a remake of another animated film in another style. Are there examples of animated films that would have benefited from a different animation style? Well, many people, I still hear from people that say you should count Lion King as animation. I get it. It is technically an animated film done in a live action style. So by the letter of the law, it is an animated film that's done in a different style. Animated films that would have benefited from a different animation style. That's a good question because the medium, I don't even call, sometimes I even catch myself calling animation a genre. Animation is not a genre. Animation is a medium, like live action is a medium, like documentary filmmaking is kind of both a medium and a genre. I think that, the ones that come to mind, I think were well suited for what they were. And quite frankly, I don't think that The Lion King really benefited from being done in that style. At least it didn't for me. That was one I saw that I just thought, well, I think that so much of the magic of this movie was lost when you made it look photo real. You look at things like I Just Can't Wait to Be King, which in the original 94 film, because it's, hand-drawn animation, it's allowed to be big and bombastic and big colors and almost like a Broadway Busby Berkeley thing and big things and animals jumping on top of each other. And then in the remake, in the 2019 version, they're just running around a field singing. And to me, that was a very big step down. So that would almost be an example of a movie, unless you're just talking box office. I think that was a step down by using a different animated style. I think that studios, especially when you look at K-pop Demon Hunters, Sony animation in general, I think that they're making a very good use of different ways to use the medium in different styles. Most people might say Luca, because I've heard so much from people who did not like the style of Luca, and they think it's too derivative and the whole bean mouth thing. I've said this before. I don't necessarily think that Luca would have been a huge hit with a different style of animation, but it certainly would have been one less thing for people to have in their back pocket to use as ammunition against the film. So I think that Luca would have benefited from having a different look, because then that talking point would be taken away. But otherwise, yeah, I think part of it is just, I don't think that Lion King 2019 particularly benefited from being done in a different style. Wells 009 says, did the guy who proposed a few streams ago ever get back to you? Did she say yes? I haven't heard that I've seen. I haven't heard directly that from him, but I believe he did say later on in the show that she said yes. So that is awesome. That was still one. I still smile when I think about that. That was so much fun. In case you missed it, I think 3 weeks ago or 2 weeks ago on the show, somebody left a super chat that was a proposal that I didn't realize was a proposal until halfway through. And I was told that she said yes. So hopefully they are both enjoying their engagement. And that was a really fun thing to be part of. Dionisio Saldana says, what canceled movie or original version would you have liked to see? For me, it's Guillermo del Toro's The Hobbit. Yes. Oh, every once in a while, I think about how great it would be to peek into an alternate reality where the only difference is that one of these projects that got canceled actually happened. And I would love to peek into that alternate universe where Guillermo del Toro ended up making those Hobbit movies. I think with him in charge, it still would have been 2. I don't think that they would have expanded it to 3 because he's so meticulous in his preparation. That would be... Oh, I wish I could see that. When people say, oh, if you could have any wish that's sort of non-consequential, if you take world peace and things that would actually benefit other people off the table, kind of a trivial wish, what would it be? That would be one of them. The ability to see all these different weird canceled, like Jodorowsky's Dune and Guillermo del Toro's Hobbit. Maybe they wouldn't all be great, but wouldn't it be interesting to see what those projects would have been? And I think that for me, I'm like you. Number one on the list would be, what would Guillermo del Toro have done with The Hobbit? Superman, the Tim Burton Superman film with Nicolas Cage. Oh, Man, would I love to see that. The planned follow-up to Batman that they were going to do with the Scarecrow, and then supposedly Jack Nicholson was going to come back for a little piece of it. I think that Schumacher was going to do it, and then Batman and Robin was what it was, and so they canceled that movie. That would have been really cool to see. There's so many out there in film history. Aditya Humna Badkar says, do you think Pattinson's Batman is in DCU or not? A lot of people have asked me this question. I mean, it seems like he's not right now. And personally, I think that he shouldn't be unless James Gunn and Matt Reeves can come together and figure out a way creatively that they're both happy with it. I don't think he should just be stuck in there just to get him in there. I think that they should be able to make it work if they want to do that. Luis Santos says, no questions. Just want to say thank you. Thank you, Luis. I appreciate that. Charles Lay says, congrats on the house. What's your take on K-pop Demon Hunters? Fortune article said Sony only made $20 million from it. Seems like a major loss for Sony, as it's reported they had no faith in it before selling it. I'm not saying that it obviously wasn't a smart business move for Sony to do that, but everybody is making that judgment retroactively. They're looking at the success that K-pop Demon Hunters was and the fact that Sony capped their benefit from it and saying, what a stupid thing to do. I agree, in hindsight, it would have been maybe a better idea for Sony to have kept control, but we also don't know. The assumption that's being made is that, let's say Sony kept it and didn't sell it to Netflix and released it in theaters. There's no guarantee that it would have been a phenomenally successful theatrical film. It may have been one of those movies that comes out in the summer that people really liked, the ones who saw it, but had perhaps an okay or maybe even a disappointing box office run, and then Sony would have licensed it to Netflix as they do with all of their other movies, and then it becomes successful in the post-theatrical window. I think a big reason why K-pop Demon Hunters did so well is because it was on streaming and it was able to grow organically and it was instantly accessible to people and rewatchable. Would these kids or these adults who have said that they've watched K-pop Demon Hunters 20, 30, 40 times on streaming, they wouldn't have bought that many tickets to the movie. They would have probably gone to see it, 2 or 3 or 4 times, and that would have benefited the box office. But I think that there is a lot of Monday morning quarterbacking going on with Sony's decision here. I'm sure they regret it, but there's no way of predicting how a movie is going to do. You just don't know. How many great movies have come out that seem like sure things, and it just doesn't come out on the right weekend, or it doesn't connect with the audience the right way, and it goes underappreciated and it's discovered later. So, yes, now it looks like Sony made the stupidest, dumbest decision in the world in selling K-pop Demon Hunters and capping off their participation in this movie. But I'm not as hard on them as some are, because you're asking them to be psychic. And that's not a slam dunk thing. The fact that, I'm going to make an animated movie about K-pop, it's a supernatural movie like that, I just think that there's a lot of revisionism going on in there and judging the process by the results. So I don't give Sony as much of a hard time. Plus, I haven't read necessarily what participation Sony does have in the sequel or any merchandising that may happen. What was the contract language for a sequel to K-pop Demon Hunters? Because I think that the animation style is a big part of why people like the film. I think that you're going to want that for a sequel. Is Sony now in a position in negotiating the production of the sequel? Because Sony Pictures Animation still did the actual animation for the film. Can they go to Netflix and say, okay, this is your biggest, it's on the way to being their most successful movie ever? Okay, let's talk budget. Let's talk about how much you're going to pay us for our services. Let's talk about maybe some of these things that weren't touched on in the original contract. If there are no revenue sharing rights, that if there are rights that weren't negotiated the first time that can be negotiated the second time. So I think there's also a possibility that Sony comes out very well in this, especially as you go forward and make more movies here. I haven't read all of the reporting that's been done on that, but yeah, I get it. I'm not as hard on Sony as others. Dylan Fitzsimmons says, "Hey Dan, I wanted to let you know that I've now seen Jaws 5 times in theaters. Boom! And I was born in 2019, or sorry, 19, not 2019. That would be a little extreme if you were 6 years old and you'd seen Jaws 5 times in theaters. I was born in 1999. That's amazing. I mean, because Jaws has been out. Let's see. There are two major theatrical releases in the last few years that I can remember. One back, I think, during National Cinema Day in 2022 or three. And then this one, I think, was by far the biggest Jaws re-release that I can remember in my modern movie-going time. So I'm glad that you've been able to experience it in theaters that many times, and that, you're part of a generation. You're 16 years younger than me. I'm glad that you have seen it that many times. And a lot of people have said to me, hey, I went and saw Jaws in theaters and I'd never seen it, or I'd never seen it on the big screen. And wow, what a great movie. And I would say, I agree. It is a great movie. Eric Ferris says, hey, I finally caught you live. Yes, thank you, Eric. I'm glad that you could catch me live. Maybe I should visit Europe more often. Have you talked about Frankenstein reactions coming out of Venice? I'm going to talk about it a little bit later on. It's part of my wrap-up of what's going on with the Venice Film Festival and what's happening there. Let's see. Geek Factor says, hey, from Poland. Hello to Poland. Finally watched Together. Liked it more than The Substance. Hope you won't block me. Listen. I know you're joking, but first of all, I would never block anyone on this channel for a respectful difference of opinion, ever, ever. Any thoughts on the Will Smith Paramount deal? I haven't read a whole lot about it. I do know that they made a deal, and Paramount's been making all kinds of deals in this new Skydance era. I was just reading that they signed a 3-year, I believe, distribution deal with Legendary. And the first movie in that deal is going to be the Street Fighter movie next year. Legendary is going to stay with Warner Brothers, I think, for things that are existing, like the Godzilla Kong movies and Dune. Those aren't going to be Paramount movies. But I will say it is an interesting time to sign a deal with Will Smith, because he's been on a very interesting run lately. But I would want to read more about what that deal actually was, because I've been kind of traveling around. I haven't had my ear to the ground as much as I have, but I will say the timing's interesting on that. Dylan Fitzsimmons says, favorite Eddie Murphy comedy? Ooh. I think now, looking back on all of it and all the ones that I've seen as an adult, it's probably Coming to America. Right, like today, right now today. But I will say that when I was growing up, in 1996, I was 13, the way that the Nutty Professor was using visual effects, what you could do with, at that time, modern visual effects in a broad mainstream comedy movie, and the multiple characters and stuff, that was a really, 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 I'm not going to say influential, memorable movie for me growing up. And for a while, that was my favorite Eddie Murphy comedy. Now I would say probably Coming to America, although there's a lot of competition there. Dylan Fitzsimmons also says, top 3 favorite Pixar movies. It's always tough for me to do top lists off the top of my head. Inside Out is definitely one of them. It's one of my favorite movies, period. So Inside Out is definitely in my top 3 favorite Pixar films. I would say there's so many great ones to choose from. I actually enjoy all of the Toy Story movies, even 4. I'm more of an advocate or fan of 4 than most people are. But that first one is so, again, 12 years old when it came out, first CG animated feature film. And I think that, and I've watched it many times since then, I think the humor holds up. The characters are so well drawn, literally by computers and on the page in that film. I think I would put Toy Story up there. So the first Toy Story, Inside Out, absolutely. And then that competition is fierce for what that number 3 spot would be. It's kind of mood dependent, because if I'm looking for the artistry of it, then it'd probably be WALL-E. If I'm looking for the adventure and the action and the music and the humor, then it would probably be The Incredibles, the first Incredibles film. If I'm looking for sentimentality, it would be Coco, because I think that Coco is such a great movie. So it may be a bit of a cop out, but I would say my third slot, it's probably locked in Inside Out and Toy Story, and that third slot is kind of revolving based on how I'm feeling that day. Oink Master Supreme Forever, aka Oinky, says, what movie surprised you the most that you loved it? That's interesting. I've said on the channel a lot that I try not to go into a movie with any sort of, as much as possible, with any sort of preconceived idea of whether I'm going to like it or not. I try to give every single movie the benefit of the doubt. One that comes to mind, that it's not necessarily that I went in expecting to not like it, but I didn't expect anything of it, was Den of Thieves, the first one. I haven't seen the second one. I heard it's not as good as the first one. But I remember Den of Thieves, Gerard Butler movie, January release, whatever. And I remember walking out going like, okay, you know what? I actually liked that movie. And then another one that I was surprised by how good it was Game Night. Game Night looked like such a sort of generic comedy, and it's still one of my favorite modern comedies. Just like Jesse Plemons' character, and just the way he's just so bizarre. I like Jason Bateman's just style of humor. I think that Rachel McAdams is very great in it. The side characters are really well drawn, and then there's just lots of solid jokes in there. So I would say that Game Night and Den of Thieves were two movies that not necessarily that I went in thinking I'm not going to like it, but that I thought, oh, I don't expect a whole lot from this, and it's really, really good. Let's pause there because we have more questions to answer. I want to talk about, as I mentioned at the top of the show, and as it's the title of the video and the thumbnail, I want to talk about the film festivals that are going on right now. We are entering festival season. This is where a lot of Oscar winners and Oscar nominees emerge. It's, we saw Anora sort of coming out at Cannes last year, and there's always a surge of movies that come out of the Cannes Film Festival early in the summer. But the fall is where you cement a lot of those films. Anora played a lot of these fall festivals and rode that momentum into the Academy Awards. And this is also where a lot of the Oscar movies make their debuts late in the year. And we saw some debuts at the Venice Film Festival, and one of them was The Smashing Machine. Sorry, I'm going to take that comment down. I always forget to take the comment down. The Smashing Machine, starring Dwayne Johnson, formerly known as The Rock, had some amazing reviews coming out of the Venice Film Festival, which wraps up on, I think, Saturday. It is Benny Safdie's biopic of UFC fighter Mark Kerr. Legitimate Oscar buzz for Dwayne Johnson. People saying that his performance was like not just surprisingly good, like, oh, wow, yeah, The Rock can act, but like actually a really good performance. Reportedly, it got a 15-minute standing ovation. I still think those are ridiculous. I've said many times that I want to go cover some of these film festivals. I'd love to go to Venice. I'd love to go to Cannes. I'm going to try to maybe go to Toronto next year if budget allows. I've already put in my application to go to Sundance and cover it this year. Hopefully I'll be able to do that. I've always wanted to be in the room for one of those standing ovations because, number one, when you read in a story that a movie actually got a 15-minute standing ovation, I want to know, is it actually 15 minutes? Like if I started a stopwatch from the first clap and it kept going until the applause died down, would it actually be 15 minutes? And secondly, what is it like to stand in a room with people who are clapping for 15 straight minutes? I mean, I get it. You want to acknowledge the actors, the director, they're in the room, they put the camera on them, they all say, thank you, thank you. That can't take more than 5 minutes, you wouldn't think. So I want to know what one of these 15-minute standing ovations is like. But I had some serious questions about this film because you often see a movie like this. It seems like it goes one of two ways, where you have somebody like Dwayne Johnson in a role that you might not expect them to play in one of these small indie films. It often will be, oh, okay, well, that was interesting casting, notable casting, but I don't know if they were the right fit for that role. Or it's what has been happening so far where people go like, oh, wow, I didn't know that this person could do that. I didn't know that Dwayne Johnson was capable of a performance like this. And that seems to be the early buzz on his performance thus far. Now, the fact that he is such a big star, and the fact that he is playing against type in that he seems to really have only played one type in so many movies, that does give him an advantage in the Oscar race, I think. If this performance is legitimately as good as people have said. The other thing to remember is that festival hype doesn't always translate to reality and how a movie's actually going to be received. But if this plays as it did in Venice, then I think that Dwayne Johnson has a shorter road to the Academy Awards because it's a good story. And when we talk about Oscar season, at least once a year, when I'm handicapping nominees or deciding who's going to be nominated for actor, actress, especially the acting awards, the Oscars love a good story, especially if the performance backs that up. Whether it's, hey, this actor who hasn't been relevant for a while just put in a great performance, John Travolta in Pulp Fiction, for example, or this kind of older actor who has never won is now up for the Oscar, and we want to see if they win, or, like when Brad Pitt won for Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, here's this very successful actor who's been also acclaimed over his career. This is a chance to give him an Oscar and celebrate their career with an award. Dwayne Johnson is one of those stories. Here's an actor that everybody might maybe counted out, like me, saying, I don't know if he's right for this role. The Rock in a serious movie, I don't think he's able to pull that off. And if he is able to do that, I mean, that is catnip. People want that. You get one of the biggest movie stars on the planet at the Academy Awards, nominated for acting. I think he has a shorter road than if, let's say, the movie's exactly the same and you have somebody playing this role who's as good as Dwayne Johnson is, but who isn't Dwayne Johnson, a lesser known actor or an unknown actor. I think it's maybe more likely that they're one of those performances that is in the conversation, but could also be one of those that people say like, oh, that person should have been nominated. They were great. So if he is as advertised in the Smashing Machine, and we're going to see it roll out, not only in theaters, but as more critics see it over the next several weeks, if he's that good, then I think that he has to be a heavy favorite to be nominated for the Oscar, because it would have been the combination of a good performance and a good story. And that is what every Oscar producer and Academy member dreams of. If you can have a compelling story with a great performance, it's a short road to being there as a nominee. So really great notices for the Smashing Machine, not just his performance, but also Emily Blunt, the movie itself. So we will see if that holds up. Other contenders that are emerging, there is a movie that is called The Testament of Anne Lee, reportedly also received a 15-minute standing ovation. Amanda Seyfried, who was nominated for Mank, in particular, drawing a lot of acclaim. She plays the founder of the Shakers, which is a religious group. The movie was directed and co-written by Mona Fastvold. Her partner is Brady Corbet, who, of course, was a multi-Oscar nominee last year for The Brutalist. He wrote the film with her, so you have somebody who was nominated last year creatively with kind of a newer filmmaker to the award scene, and then apparently Amanda Seyfried is very good in that film, so her performance in The Testament of Anne Lee could very well be something that we see moving forward. Catherine Bigelow has a new film called A House of Dynamite, about a nuclear missile that's launched at the U.S. Officials are trying to figure out what the response should be. Idris Elba's in the movie, Jason Clarke, Rebecca Ferguson. That one got a very enthusiastic response at Venice, so we'll see if that translates to a lot of award season stuff. Park Chan-wook's new film, which is called No Other Choice, right now on Rotten Tomatoes has all positive reviews. I think it's got about 20 reviews. They're all not thumbs up, but fresh reviews. Lee Byung-hun, who is in the conversation because he's been in a lot of other things that have been very popular. He plays somebody who's laid off from his job and he's desperately trying to find another one. Really, I think the place to look out for it is South Korea selected this film already to be their entrant or their entry for the Best International Film Oscars. So if this continues to be a critically acclaimed film, you could very easily see this movie maybe just in or definitely in the Best International Film race and perhaps other races. We had that question earlier about Frankenstein, Guillermo del Toro's Frankenstein. It got some reviews coming in from Venice. It's also playing at the Toronto International Film Festival, so we should hear more reviews in the coming days. The response generally was positive, not unanimously positive. There were, I think, about 20% of the people that reviewed it so far were not huge fans of it. But generally, so far, response has been positive. It sounds like it's an unconventional take on the Frankenstein story. So we'll see where that goes. And like I said, it will be premiering in the coming days at Toronto, so we'll get more input on that. And speaking of Toronto, I'm not going to do a full rundown because there are so many movies playing, and I'm going to do a wrap-up of the Toronto Film Festival at the end of it in about a week and a half. So I'll highlight more specific movies when we get there. But I wanted to highlight, first of all, we had the Chloe Zhao question earlier. She has a movie coming out called Hamnet. It premiered this past weekend at the Telluride Film Festival, which is kind of getting a reputation for being a film or a festival sometimes where movies that maybe not necessarily are on the radar could make their premieres. I think there's some buzz building around Telluride. It's about the death of William Shakespeare and Agnes Shakespeare's son. Paul Mescal and Jesse Buckley are the stars of the movie. But the film itself, Chloe Zhao as the director and Jesse Buckley in the Best Actress race are really attracting some huge awards buzz. I would say that this was the film of the festival. It would appear coming out of Telluride, huge acclaim. And so we will be hearing hopefully more about that as the critics see it and the people at in Toronto see Hamnet, because this could be a big time front runner for the Oscars. And then we'll also have the premiere of Wake Up Dead Man, which is, of course, the next Knives Out movie. That will be having, I believe, its world premiere at Toronto ahead of its limited theatrical run and then hitting Netflix later in the year. So we'll get to see what Rian Johnson's got cooking up. And as I mentioned, dozens and dozens and dozens of other movies that are playing Toronto, other movies that are Oscar contenders or could be Oscar contenders. I'm keeping an eye on the reviews and what people are saying. And once that's all done, and the audience award, which is sort of the top prize that the Toronto Film Festival is awarded, I'll probably do a wrap up here on the channel of movies to watch out for, maybe include some other stuff from Venice, because believe it or not, it's time to start talking about the Oscars because the movies are coming out. We're starting to get that early buzz, and you know me, I love covering the Oscars and handicapping the nominees, and we're starting to see which ones are emerging. And it's also why I often don't like to do it early in the year, because there are a few that I think are going to be relevant. A lot of movies that played at the Cannes Film Festival are also playing in Toronto, and I think some also played in Venice. And I will cover that at the end of Toronto, and I already did talk about a lot of them back in May or June. But a lot of those films, we get the fall festival films, but you don't really know what the race is going to look like until right around now. This is when you start getting the contenders, and you can figure out, okay, what about movies like Sinners that came out earlier in the year? Where is it going to sit? Is it gonna be able to still be in the race? Now is when we can start making those determinations. I don't like to do it earlier in the year because there's so many other movies that we haven't seen yet. This is really where we start to formulate a picture and start figuring out what are the 10? Who are the 10? Maybe the 10 top nominees. We don't quite know that yet. All right, so that's what I've got as far as Venice, as far as possible Oscar nominee Dwayne Johnson, as far as what's happening at Toronto. Let's wrap up the show with your questions, and we've got plenty more to go. I'm going to hydrate myself just a little bit here because otherwise my voice is going to be cracking like that kid on The Simpsons if I don't drink some water. All right, excuse me. VNKZ27 says, what is your take on franchises like Alien and Star Wars stuck with the 70s, 80s tech aesthetic because they're OGs being from that era, but the story is set in the future? Thank you. I think it can work. It's only throwback here on Earth. If you establish that this is the aesthetic of the era in universe, then you can do that aesthetic forever. I think the mistake, and I get it, that was made with the prequels, and this is not prequel bashing, this is just kind of a stylistic thing, is George Lucas was so enamored with the new digital technology that was available in the late 90s and going into the early to mid 2000s. The Star Wars prequels looked so much slicker, and they took place in a world that was so much slicker technologically and looked different from the original films, that then it became a debate over what should the aesthetic of the movies be. I think if you had kept it in that same aesthetic, then it would have been fine. I think that the Alien films generally, and I watched them all I think a couple years ago for a ranking video I did, I think the Alien films generally have done a pretty good job of staying consistent. I mean, Prometheus definitely had some tech that was maybe a little more advanced, but you can also, say that it's set. If you go back far enough, then you can say that's why it's different. If you go ahead far enough, you can say that's why it's different. Or if you introduce new companies or new whatever. But I actually kind of love it when you have a movie that's in a franchise that was established in the 70s or 80s and has that aesthetic. If you can bring that into the modern age and make a movie now with that same aesthetic and make it work, then I actually appreciate that. I thought that Rogue One did a really good job of making a movie that didn't look old. It didn't look dated. it looked new and the effects were good and the production design was really good, but it used the same aesthetics that we knew because it was set right before Star Wars. There's no wiggling out of how things should look. I thought it did a really good job of being a movie in universe that was set, that was designed initially 50 years ago, but also looks modern and sleek and all that stuff. Clay says, "Hey Dan, big fan. Just wanted to know if you're planning on seeing and reviewing Shelby Oaks. I remember you and Chris worked together on Screen Junkies. I'm excited for it, and I hope it's great." Yeah, thanks for that question, Clay. I have been asked that question a few different times. To be quite honest with you, I'm not entirely sure how I'm going to approach Shelby Oaks for a couple of reasons. Number one, as you said, Chris came out and did some stuff while we were doing Screen Junkies Plus, and he used to be out 3 or 4 times a year to do his show, and I got to know him, fairly well. I would say we're friendly, and we've exchanged emails and stuff over the years since then. So I think that can present a challenge because I'm obviously rooting for him and I'm rooting for the movie as somebody who's I'm on friendly terms with, and I respect what he's done, which is to say, hey, I'm going to kind of put my money where my mouth is as a critic, and I'm going to make a movie. I respect that, and also, for those reasons, I contributed not a massive amount of money, but I did contribute to the Kickstarter when Chris was raising money for the film, and so it's tough for me to sort of navigate. I always want to be objective about every movie that I review and everything that I talk about. So I am trying to piece together how I'm going to approach it, because if I'm going to review the film, I need to make sure that I'm able, in order to give you an objective review of the film, I need to make sure that I'm able to piece out how I feel about Chris as somebody who I respect and who's been in the same field with me. I respect what he's built on YouTube and the fact that he helped sort of invent doing what I'm doing right here on this channel. I need to make sure that I'm able to stay objective about the movie. So I don't know is the question. I would like to think that I'll be able to do it, but it's something that I need to make sure that I am able to do it, because, those conflicts of interest, I think, are okay as a critic as long as you're able to disclose them. And I want to make sure whether if I love the movie, I want to make sure that I love the movie because I think that if I didn't know Chris or anything about the movie, that I would still love it. And, if I'm not, let's say, a big fan of the movie, I want to make sure that I'm not pulling my punches or rounding off the edges on what I'm saying, because I don't want to in any way contribute to a negative discourse around it. Because again, I know that Chris, this is sort of his dream is to make a movie like this. So I'm working on it. That's what I'll say. TBD. I know it's a long answer to a very simple question, but I'm not 100% sure. Crash the Max says, "Did you see Honey Don't? I was looking forward to it and was left disappointed. I did not see Honey Don't. I've heard that sentiment from a lot of people, though. I can't see everything, and I do have to kind of pick and choose. And that was one I kind of chose not to see." Eric Ferris says, "Speaking of the substance, I finally watched it on a plane. Maybe a horrible choice, but I loved it. Worst plane movie decision you've made?" Well, first of all, I have follow-up questions for you on this. Was it part of the in-flight entertainment, or were you watching it like on your own personal device on the plane? Because I will tell you, if the substance was part of your in-flight entertainment, then I don't think that you've actually seen the substance, because there's no way that any airline is going to approve that movie to be shown without making cuts, because airlines do still do that. If you were just watching it on your own, I really have follow-up questions for the people sitting around you and what they thought, because that would be quite something to look over, especially like the third act, or be walking back from the bathroom and see somebody watching that on the plane. So I'm curious to see how you saw it. If it was part of the in-flight entertainment, I think you might not have seen the most extreme parts of the movie, which are really kind of part of the huge aesthetic of the movie. Worst plane movie decision that I've made. I don't watch a lot of movies on planes. Well, I do, but to be honest, I am somewhat sensitive to whether people might see what I'm watching. Like I may be overly sensitive. Like I don't want to offend anybody and watch something that somebody's going to go like their kid sees it, or they're going to be like, oh, my 6-year-old saw the, what are you watching this movie? Because I think if I had my nephews on a plane and somebody was watching, let's say, The Substance, and they saw something really extreme, I wouldn't be particularly happy about it. So I try to curate what I watch. I did watch one time, it was part of the in-flight entertainment. I watched Dope, the movie Dope. And the cuts to the movie were done really well because I didn't realize until I watched it again that they had actually cut out some of the funnier moments in the film for those reasons, because they were a little too over the top to be shown on an airplane where other people can see it. So I think that was not a good choice because I thought I'd seen the movie and there were some really funny parts in the movie that weren't in there. But I'm curious to see how it was that you watched The Substance and what everyone else thought. Koss says, thoughts on It's a Wonderful Life. I think it's one of the best movies ever made. Well, certainly one of my favorite. It's something that I watch every single year right around Christmas time. And it's a great example of how, even on Charts, which is a show about box office, I always say box office isn't everything. Reception isn't everything. What happens when a movie comes out and whether people see it and what the critics think of it, etc., is not the final word. And It's a Wonderful Life is a great example of that. 2-3 decades later, it really starts to build its reputation as one of the classic movies of American cinema, and I think that it is that. I love it. I love the way that it's written. I love what it has to say. Great movie. Fantastic movie. Smash says, to tie in with your recent poll, what are your top 3 most anticipated fall or winter releases? Well, I mean, The Smashing Machine was one that I was already, because I already like the Safdies, and I was curious about The Smashing Machine, but now that I'm starting to hear that buzz on it, I'd say The Smashing Machine is right up there. Wicked, for good, I think I mentioned this before, but if you didn't hear it before, when I saw the first Wicked movie, I had not seen the musical. And I wanted to kind of experience that world fresh. What I have done in the year in between is this past summer I went to New York and I did see the musical. And so now for the second film, I have a basis of comparison. And from what I observed, and also from what I've heard other people say, the second act is really where the adaptation process could benefit. The movie overall could benefit from a more aggressive adaptation process. So I'm really anxious to see it because I want to see what they do with that second act, because they can't do it as is. The first act is pretty much as is. The second act, you can't do it's too short, and you can't do a movie out of it because it doesn't really all gel together. It works fine on stage, but as a movie, it doesn't all gel together. So I'd say Wicked for Good is up there. The Smashing Machine is now up there. And then, you know what? Whatever. I put one Safdie brother up there. I'll put the other one. Marty Supreme, I think, looks really interesting. I don't know what Mr. Wonderful is doing in that movie or whether he's going to be any good. I'm a Timothée Chalamet fan. I generally like his performances. So I'll put both Safdie brothers in their separate movies and Wicked for Good on that list, and about 15 other films. Kaz says, when non-English speaking directors make an English speaking movie, do they use a translator on set? How is the language barrier usually overcome? From what I've read, yes, often that is exactly what they do. They will have somebody who can translate what they're saying to the actors, and vice versa, as I understand. If an English speaking, let's say, actor is working on a movie where the director may not speak English, there can be some translation that goes on. But I think that, there's a collaborative process. The other part is that I think that it's much more common in the United States for somebody to speak English only and not speak another language, whereas I think it's much more common in most other countries to speak the language of that country, but also be able to speak English, because I just think that we're not as aggressive about that culturally here in the United States as they are in many other countries. So I also think it's less common for a director who doesn't speak any English to come in and direct an English-speaking movie. But from what I've read, yes, there are also directors or translators that come in and help with that process. Christopher Brickner says, Lucasfilm is wanting to do a new Star Wars saga. Do you have faith in them? I don't. Marvel struggled with their second saga after succeeding with their first, so why should we expect Lucasfilm to do any better? Yeah, I do. I mean, the thing with Lucasfilm is, the batting average, I think, is down, but Lucasfilm has made some great Star Wars stuff. and some stuff that's not great. They did season 1 of The Mandalorian. They did both seasons of Andor. They did Rogue One, which I thought was really, really good. And yeah, they've done some stuff that wasn't as good. But do I have faith in them? Yes, because ultimately, Lucasfilm isn't making the movie. They are going out and finding the creatives to make that movie. They're bringing in writers to make that movie and directors to make that movie. And this is often what when people bring up Kathleen Kennedy and stuff, it's like Kathleen Kennedy isn't rewriting the script. She's in charge of the apparatus of the company that's doing it. But I think that often Lucasfilm, and if you want to say Kathleen Kennedy or whoever, Lucasfilm tends to get all of the blame when a project is not good. And when a movie or show is good, then Jon Favreau or Tony Gilroy or whoever has actually made that show or movie gets all the credit. And Lucasfilm doesn't get any credit. And it's the same company making both. Same one. So, yes, I do have faith that they can do it. I hope they do it because they've made good stuff before. Marvel's been inconsistent as well. I think that they're kind of back on the right foot. So I think that Lucasfilm may very well also be on that track. Phil Smith says, hi, Dan. With the re-releases like Jaws, Interstellar, and Revenge of the Sith doing okay, do you have thoughts on what theaters could show during the autumn lull? I mean, there are other remakes that are coming out. I saw that the Twilight movies are all getting re-released theatrically this fall. So that could help. I think that I think what we're seeing now is that studios and theaters are being a little more thoughtful about this kind of thing. It's not just Fathom Events coming in and doing the re-releases that they always do. Studios are now saying, okay, we need to bring up revenues. And I think they're being more strategic about movies like Revenge of the Sith, Jaws, Twilight, whatever, and what might succeed. And so I think that if you can put a good marketing campaign behind it and really try to tap into what people want to go see, what they will pay to see, I think this is a great way to kind of come in during a lull period and boost the box office revenue. So I would say I think re-releases are a great idea. They should keep being strategic and find out what's a good timing on this and what would people actually want to go see. We're getting near the end of the questions that I have. So if you still have a question to ask, send it in now. When I get to the end of the list, we'll probably wrap up the show. But let's see what we got from Eric Ferris, who says, it was indeed part of the in-flight entertainment on Virgin, fully uncut. I tried to ignore my neighbors. Okay, well, on Virgin, I get it. Virgin, I think, has a bit different, Delta, United, American. I can't imagine it being there as part of in-flight entertainment. Virgin, I could see. Still, though, that is surprising to me that it was available as in-flight entertainment on any plane. I would also, I have to say, try to ignore my neighbors. And then finally from Eric Ferris, last note on my flight, I did at least look around to be sure there were no kids who could see. That's awesome. Then I have no problem with you choosing The Substance as in-flight entertainment because that means you got to see what was my favorite movie of last year. If the kids weren't around, no issues whatsoever. I would really love to have been the person sitting next to you, especially if that person had never seen The Substance and be like, what is this guy watching? Last question for now, unless we get any more that come in. Christopher Brickner says, Lucasfilm's plan for Rey to be in many films could backfire and come off as favoritism to your new character and trying to force fans to like them. I mean, well, that's the other thing. The way that it works now, and it's part studio and it's part entertainment media, it used to be that development of ideas, that a company like Lucasfilm or a studio like Disney, they're always developing ideas. Always. There are creative people that are pitching things and projects. Some of them happen and some of them don't happen. And what sort of happened, especially in the era of the internet, let's call it the post Ain't It Cool news era. And now in the era of Deadline and THR and Variety and Hollywood Reporter and all the independent scoopers out there, all trying to outdo themselves and be the first to break certain news, it feels like the second any idea gets pitched in a writer's room, it gets reported as news. They're making this movie, and Daisy Ridley's going to do this. What we know for sure is that Lucasfilm wants to bring Daisy Ridley back as Rey. and that there were some plans for this particular movie, and maybe that movie's going to happen and maybe that movie's not going to happen. But this idea of, okay, we're going to take a rough plan it's been reported that a studio is working on and run with it and say, how could they do this? This is a terrible long-term strategy. We don't know what their strategy is with that, but the way that it works now is that creative development happens in front of everybody because word leaks out, it gets reported as news, and nothing really happens sort of behind the curtain anymore. The curtain has been pulled back and it's there for everybody to see, and everybody's watching how the sausage gets made. And you don't always want to see how the sausage gets made. It's nice to know, like, I love that we didn't know that James Gunn was doing a Man of Steel or that James Gunn was doing a Superman sequel until he announced it. You know, like, when's the last time you can remember that there's a Superman or a superhero movie that was 2 years from release that we didn't know about until 2 years before? I like that that was sort of kept under wraps, because let's say that Superman really didn't do well and the decision was made to not do Man of Tomorrow in 2 years. Let's work on something else. If it was known that they were already planning to do a sequel in 2027, then the cancellation of that sequel would have been huge news, because it's like, see, they don't have any faith in the character. The future of DC and Warner Brothers is in trouble. Everybody, and people would have lost their minds about it. So again, I know this is kind of a riff on what you're asking, but the idea of saying, well, it's a terrible idea for Disney to use Rey in a bunch of different films. I understand there's been reporting that they might be thinking about that, but you have to wait until they actually say, this is what we're doing. These are our plans. Concretely, we are announcing that these are our plans, and what the studios have gotten wrong, and Marvel has gotten wrong, and Lucasfilm has gotten wrong, and DC has gotten wrong, is that they do that too much, and they do it too early. They actually come out and say, this is what we're doing on this date 5 years from now. That's a bad idea. It kind of loops us back to the beginning of the show. It's a bad idea, but it also gets reported way too much. And there's no ability for the studios to actually do this sort of thinking and spitballing and brainstorming privately. It gets reported as news. So I understand your concerns with that. I also am not really sure what the audience interest is as far as Daisy Ridley coming back, or the future of Rey, or how many movies Rey should be in, or if that's the path forward for Star Wars. I like the character. I think that there are some interesting avenues to follow, but I think my advice would be, as a fan of Star Wars, or not a fan of Star Wars, or a fan or not a fan of Rey, is to just wait until we know exactly what they're planning to do, until they announce exactly what movies are coming out. And then if they cancel it, then if they say, oh, we were going to do this trilogy, but now we're not. If Disney's the one that says that, then you can start maybe looking at the long-term strategy, etc. But I think that's premature at this point, because I don't know if Lucasfilm really knows at this point what they're going to be doing 5 years from now. I think they're working on it. So I generally am of the opinion that you should give them some room to work and let the chips fall where they may. All right, I talked for so long that a few more questions came in, so let's wrap up with these. Generic Man says, with Michael Bay rumored to be back to the Transformers, do you feel that he'd be able to bring the franchise back to its box office glory? Maybe, but it can't just be on the back of it's Michael Bay, because I think that the well was run dry of people that would just go to see a Transformers movie because it was a Michael Bay Transformers movie. I think if you can combine Michael Bay's return with an exciting creative direction, and most importantly, a good movie, then yes, I think that he could. I think that if you just say Michael Bay is back and he's making another Transformers film, I don't think that's enough to get it back to where it was. And by the way, I don't know if anything would be able to get it back to where it was, to what the Transformers movies were doing in 2007 or even 2014. But I think that you can be successful with a combination of Michael Bay's back and here's the great idea that he's going to be doing. I think that you could see certainly an improvement over where the franchise has been in the last several years. Fella Guy says, I went to see Jaws over the weekend, and unfortunately a group of teenagers spent the entire film watching TikToks with the volume up and talking. Will theaters ever commit to actual ushers? I had a very similar experience the last time Jaws was back in theaters. It was on National Cinema Day. And it was the same thing. The only way I can describe it is a roving pack of teenagers. And I'm not an old man who's like, oh, you kids. Like, this was literally a roving pack of teenagers who were running into theaters and running out, and would come in, and then an usher would come in and they'd run out, and then they'd come back. And I just left in the middle because it was an absolute nightmare and not a fun viewing experience. That to me seems like somebody should have said something, because I've said it. I don't mind saying something. I will say something to somebody. You have to make a judgment call. I've said something to someone directly. I've asked them to put their phone away. I've asked them to stop talking, and I've never really actually had a negative experience with that. They might be angry at me, but I've never gotten punched in the face, and they usually do what I ask them to do. If it's a big group of teenagers, I would hope that somebody went to the management outside and said, hey, there's a disruptive group in this theater, because then the onus is on them. Now, if somebody went to the management and they didn't do anything, then that's on the management. That's on the theater. They should be enforcing their policies. But if nobody reported it, nothing's going to happen. I've said, when I talk about how I think theaters could be better, I am in favor of bringing back ushers, or at least people that roam, people that pop in and out, people that keep an eye on a movie while it's going on, and that can maybe spot this behavior without somebody reporting it. But right now, the way the system works, it is on theaters to enforce it, but I think if it's disruptive enough, somebody has to report it as well. So I hope, for your sake, that, not even for your sake, but I think that it's much more kind of damning of the theater if somebody reported it and nothing was done, than if everybody just kind of said, oh, this sucks. Because I get it, it does suck, but you have to give people the heads up. So no, I don't think theaters will ever commit to ushers again, and unfortunately the onus falls on the audience to, at a minimum, go outside and tell the management, hey, these kids are watching TikToks. Also, why would you go to a movie? And I don't understand the psychology behind people that buy tickets for movies that say, I'm going to commit to spending time and money in a movie theater with no intention of watching the movie, and not just talking to each other, but watching You can sit outside the movie theater and watch TikToks for free. American shopping malls are basically deserted. We have multi-100,000 square foot places where you can go sit in air conditioning and watch TikToks for free. Why would you do it in a movie theater where you have to pay for entry and where you're disrupting other people? I don't understand that. That is where I'm an old man. I don't get that. Christopher Brickner says, my skepticism and doubt for Lucasfilm succeeding is for me getting burned by the sequel trilogy. I was excited, but it killed my interest in its canon. I get it. I think the thing with Star Wars, and this is the thing it always has been, if you don't like it, if it's not your thing anymore, it's okay for it to not be your thing anymore. That's fine. If you don't have any interest in it anymore, that's okay. You can just say, hey, I used to like Star Wars and now I don't like Star Wars anymore. That's sort of where I was when the prequels came out. I was not a fan of the prequels when they came out. They were much less popular in the, 1999, 2002, 2005 than they were, than they are now, because it's a different generation and people view them differently. But that's kind of where I was. I liked Star Wars, and now I don't really so much. And that's why I didn't watch Clone Wars when it came out, when it was on TV, when the animated show was on. I didn't watch it because I was like, I don't know if it's my thing anymore. And then it kind of won me back over. And I still watch the old movies. Nothing changed about those movies. But I think one of the issues with Star Wars or any fandom is this idea that if you make something, or if somebody feels like it's moving on from them, or they made a bunch of things that they don't like, I think oftentimes the reaction is to go like, and now it's on you to make me happy again. Sometimes they'll do that. Sometimes a franchise can recover and sort of win back over those fans, but sometimes things just move on. Sometimes you're just not going to get what you loved from something that they used to make. Part of that is the natural progression of a change in direction. And part of that, quite frankly, is just kind of becoming a different human being as you get older. So I understand it. If you love Star Wars, and I didn't love the sequel trilogy either. I'm a big fan of The Force Awakens. I think that Last Jedi had some stuff I loved and some stuff I really didn't love. And I thought Rise of Skywalker was the worst possible version of that movie that you could have made. Commit to nothing and compromise on everything. But, that just kind of leads me to go like, okay, well, Star Wars is going to be more hit and miss for me. It's not so much like I'm waiting for you to do what you did before. It's things don't always work out that way. So, I would just say cut them a little slack and maybe be prepared to accept that this could just be a franchise that's not going to make the things that you liked before. It happens. It's not fun, but, it happens. Zach Likes Things says, question. I don't know, man. What kind of cake do you vibe with? Well, I mean, I vibe with most cakes. I'm not going to lie. I vibe with almost every variety of cake that there is. I vibe with cake too much. I have to be careful. Cake and I get along too well. So I will say that generally, like if somebody's like, what kind of cake do you want? I love a yellow cake with like a strawberry frosting. I like strawberry. It's like a yellow cake with strawberry frosting. Chocolate cake I'm good with, but not chocolate on chocolate. I'll eat it if it's what you got, because as I mentioned, I vibe with cake in general. Chocolate on chocolate, not my favorite. Honestly, for me, top of the list, ice cream cake. Controversial. Some people say it's not cake or that it's at best a hybrid, but the name cake is in the name. So ice cream cake for me, top of the list. I'm more of a yellow cake guy. I like a strawberry frosting. Oh, actually, no, I forgot my favorite kind of cake, lemon cake. And I will go chocolate on chocolate, no. Lemon on lemon, yes. I love a lemon cake with a lemon frosting. I like sour things. I like citrus. So yeah, the tier list would be top vibes, like, wife vibes with lemon cake, lemon on lemon frosting, whatever you got. Yellow cake with most frostings. Yellow cake with lemon frosting, perfectly acceptable. Love it. Chocolate on chocolate, probably on my lowest tier list. And then let's just say special category ice cream cake. Wouldn't eat it every day, but still love it. Probably more than you ever wanted to know about me and cake. All right, I think this is, we got 2 questions left. Vinx27 says, are you excited for the A24 Elden Ring movie? Do you game? I don't game that often. I tend to pick one game and play it for like a month straight when I have time, and then I don't play again for like 6 months. So like the Spider-Man games I've played, College Football 25 I played last year. Every once in a while I'll pick maybe a couple games, but I'm not a big gamer, and especially something like Elden Ring, Skyrim, games like that, I don't have the time to appreciate them fully, so I don't really get into those games. So I don't really have any feelings about the Elden Ring movie, but I am excited about the filmmaker. So I think it could be an interesting movie. And if I go in cold, it'll be a good test on how well he translates that to that Elden Ring mythology. But yeah, I'm a very hit or miss gamer. And then our last question is Vision Tower production went to Venice, The Last Viking, featuring Mads Mikkelsen, 9 out of 10. I heard some good things about his performance there. That's one I'm keeping my eye on because I would love to see that performance. And congratulations, by the way, on going to Venice. I do have, when people ask what would you do if you won the lottery, what would you do if this or that? Honestly, as film nerdy as it sounds, I think one of the things that I would do if I could afford it and afford like the nice passes and stuff is I would do the film festival circuit every year. I'd go to Sundance at the beginning of the year. I'd go to Cannes in the middle of the year. August, September would just be I'd go to Venice. I'd fly from Venice. I'd go to Toronto and go to all those movies. That would be like heaven for me to be able to do that every year. So that's, I think that's what every film nerd, film geek would do if they had unlimited resources, is just hit all those film festivals, because I'd love to see those movies. I'm actually disappointed because I was going to go cover Fantastic Fest this year, which happens later this month, and I was really, really excited about it. At the time that I was planning to do that, this house thing was not really on the radar. I was looking at houses, but I wasn't necessarily planning to buy a house right now. This house just was perfectly fit and was in my range, and everything else, it all just kind of lined up perfectly. One of the sacrifices that I had to make was that I'm going to have to give up on Fantastic Fest. It just budgetarily and logistically, I'm not able to spend a week in Austin during the time that Fantastic Fest is happening, and it's also an expense that, yeah, I wasn't really planning on. So I'm gonna have to push my dream of covering a film festival for the first time to 2026. But as I mentioned, I have put in an application to cover Sundance. So fingers crossed, maybe this year will be the year. It's gotten turned down a few times, but there's also a lot of people that want to cover it. If I do get the chance to, that I will make work. No disrespect to Fantastic Fest. If I could have made Fantastic Fest work, I would have. It's just it was in such close proximity to doing the house. I am already sort of earmarking whatever money I can save to potentially going to Sundance in January if I can. Yeah, so fingers crossed. Some great questions today. Thank you to everybody that asked a question, covering everything from Star Wars. I hope I didn't talk too much, but sometimes you get me going on a subject. As you know, I'll just keep going. I don't know if we had any certified Dan rants today, but I think we came kind of close. Thanks to everybody watching live. Thanks to everybody watching afterwards that might be watching this post-broadcast. Stay tuned. I am going to try to keep this consistent on Wednesdays, not Thursdays, if I can. But I also ask for your patience in the next few weeks as I'm navigating the transition from this space to the new space. But most of all, be sure to stay safe. Thanks for watching this video, and I'll see you next time. Bye.